Story 1, The Uninvited, by MarGen.Z. When I was around 16, an incident occurred that I've seldom discussed. However, after reading some stories here, I felt compelled to share. Perhaps others can relate, or at the very least it might serve as a cautionary tale. My parents had gone out for the night, some work event or something, and I was home alone. We lived in a pretty quiet suburb, so I wasn't really worried about being by myself. I was in my room, headphones on, lost in my own world. Around 9 p.m., I decided to head downstairs to grab a snack. As I was walking down the stairs, I thought I heard a noise from the back of the house. It sounded like, I don't know, like a faint tapping. I paused my music and listened, but it stopped. I brushed it off as just the house settling or maybe a tree branch against a window. I went into the kitchen, and as I was rummaging through the fridge, I heard it again. This time, it was more distinct. It was definitely a tapping sound, and it was coming from the sliding glass door that led to our backyard. I froze. The kitchen lights were off, and the only light was the dim glow from the streetlights outside. I slowly approached the door, trying to see if maybe there was an animal or something out there. But as I got closer, I saw a silhouette of a man. He was just standing there, tapping on the glass with his fingers. My heart was pounding so hard, I thought it would burst out of my chest. I ducked down and crawled to the living room, grabbing my phone from the coffee table. I dialed 911 and whispered to the operator what was happening. She told me to stay quiet and find a safe place to hide. I crawled into the coat closet near the front door, burying myself under some winter jackets. The operator stayed on the line with me, and I could hear the tapping getting louder and more persistent. Then, the most terrifying thing happened. I heard the sliding door slowly creak open. Footsteps. They were soft but deliberate. I held my breath, praying he wouldn't come near the closet. The footsteps moved through the living room, then the dining room, and then they started up the stairs. I was paralyzed with fear. The operator was whispering to me, telling me the police were on their way, but it felt like an eternity. Then, suddenly, I heard sirens in the distance. The footsteps hurried, moving back towards the sliding door. A few moments later, the sirens were blaring right outside my house. I heard shouting, then the sound of someone being tackled and handcuffed. I emerged from the closet, shaking and crying. The police had caught the guy. He was a known burglar in the area, and they'd been trying to catch him for weeks. They told me I did the right thing by hiding and calling them. I was so grateful, but the trauma of that night stayed with me for a long time. I couldn't be alone in the house for months. Every little noise would send me into a panic. So, yeah, it's my story. It's not supernatural or anything, but it was the scariest night of my life. Always lock your doors, guys. And if you ever feel like something's off, trust your gut. It might just save your life. Story 2, The Night of the Silent Caller, by YounGenFree. So, I guess I'll jump right into it. This happened to me a few years back, and I still get chills thinking about it. I was about 16 at the time, and my parents had gone out for the evening, leaving me home alone. I wasn't scared or anything. I'd been home alone plenty of times before, but this night was different. It started with a phone call. The landline rang, and I picked it up, expecting it to be my parents checking in. But there was no one there. Just silence. I figured it was a wrong number or something, so I hung up. A few minutes later, the phone rang again. Same thing. Silence. Now, I was starting to feel a little uneasy, but I tried to brush it off. I mean, it was probably just a glitch or something, right? But then it happened again and again. And each time, there was nothing but silence on the other end. I called my best friend, Sarah, and I told her what was happening. She said she'd heard about something like this before. There was this guy, she said, who would call young girls when they were home alone. He'd just listen to them, breathing on the other end of the line. It was like he could sense their fear or something. It was creepy as hell. I was freaked out by now, so I locked all the doors and windows and turned on all the lights. I tried to watch TV to take my mind off it, but I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me. The phone rang again, and this time, I didn't answer it. I just let it ring and ring until it stopped, but it kept happening over and over for what felt like hours. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I called the police and told them what was happening. They said they'd send a car over to check things out. While I was waiting for them, I looked out the window and saw something that made my blood run cold. There was a man standing across the street, just staring at my house. He was tall and thin, and he was wearing a dark coat and had a hat that shadowed his face. I screamed and ran to the back of the house, hiding in my parents' bedroom until the police arrived. When they got there, the man was gone, but they found evidence that he'd been watching me. Footprints in the mud, cigarette butts, stuff like that. They never caught him, but they told me that there had been other incidents like this in the area, always targeting young girls, always when they were home alone. I don't know what he wanted or why he chose me, but I'll never forget that night. I'll never forget the feeling of being watched, of being targeted. And I'll never forget the sound of that silent call, the way it seemed to echo in the emptiness of my house. I still wonder sometimes if he's out there, watching and waiting, and I still check the locks on my doors and windows every night just in case. So, if you're ever home alone and the phone rings and there's no one there, just remember, it might not be a wrong number. It might be something much, much worse. Story 3. The Face He Couldn't Forget by BillieJean. So, this happened to me a few years ago, and I guess I'm sharing it now because I want others to know that sometimes the real monsters aren't the ones in horror movies. They're the ones that walk among us. It was a Friday night, and my parents were out of town. I was 16 at the time, and honestly, I was looking forward to a quiet night in. I had my snacks, my favorite series queued up, and the whole house to myself. The evening started off pretty chill. I was deep into my show, and I decided to get up to grab a drink from the kitchen. As I was pouring myself a soda, I felt this weird feeling, like someone was watching me. I glanced over to the window, and there he was, the man. He was just staring at me with his creepy, wide smile. Our eyes locked, and I froze. It was like one of those nightmares where you want to scream, but no sound comes out. I finally snapped out of it and ran back to the living room, locking the door behind me. That's when the knocking started. I peeked through the blinds, and there he was, still with that unsettling smile. He looked off. His clothes were tattered, and he had this wild look in his eyes. I decided not to answer, but then he knocked again, louder this time. I felt my heart race. "Sarah? Sarah, is that you?" he called out. "My name's not Sarah," I shouted back. "You've got the wrong house, dude." But he persisted. He started crying. "Sarah, please, I just want to talk. I've missed you so much." I called the cops. As I was on the phone with him, I heard a window at the back of the house shatter. He was trying to get in. I locked myself in my room, clutching a baseball bat. I could hear him moving around downstairs, still calling out for Sarah. Every noise made my heart jump. I was praying the cops would get here soon. When they finally arrived, they found him in the living room, just sitting there, staring at a picture of me. Turns out, he was a former patient from a nearby mental institution. He had been obsessed with his ex-girlfriend, Sarah, who looked eerily like me. He had seen me in town a few days before and had followed me home, thinking I was her. The cops took him away, and later I found out he was sent back to a more secure facility. But the trauma of that night stayed with me. I couldn't be alone in the house for months. Every noise, every shadow made me jump. So, that's my story. Real life horror. Always trust your gut. And if something feels off, it probably is. Stay safe out there.